you imagine if I used the F-bomb? You know what it would be? I tell people, it would be the electric chair.
There's the childish nicknames.
Very people who perpetrated the lies that I was an agent of Russia, like Adam Shifty Schiff and others.
The crazy conspiracy theories.
If you look for a job and you give up looking for that job because after 4 or 5 months you can't find one, you are considered statistically employed. We have
this weird obsession with crowd sizes.
This is the Rebel Alliance. Impeachment is no longer enough. Just 11 days into his second presidency, Donald Trump must immediately be removed from office using the 25th Amendment. This is not about pardoning terrorists, banning transgenders from serving in the military, blackmailing California to pass a voter suppression law, or demanding that federal funds be withheld from schools that don't whitewash their history books. I will get to that. But the reason Donald Trump must be immediately removed from office is his response to the plane crash in D.C. this week. An American Airlines jet went down into the Potomac River Wednesday night after it collided with a U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter. The crash resulted in at least 67 deaths, including teenage figure skating champions, their coaches, and their moms. In a press event on Thursday, Trump's main focus was to place blame for the crash on President Biden and President Obama. This comes just a week after Trump fired the administrator of the FAA without appointing even an acting administrator until after the crash. It also comes after Trump's new Department of Government Efficiency cut a large number of staff from air traffic control, causing there to be a shortage of controllers. At the time of the crash, there was only one controller guiding both planes and helicopters, a job normally done by 2 people. Trump then went on to blame former Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg, and then said the problem was DEI. Trump's newest con is to blame everything that goes wrong on DEI. Well, Trump is a genius, and he knows everything. We know this because he's told us so. So we know he must be right that the accident would have never happened if air traffic control had been staffed only by straight white men. As of this recording, the real reason for the crash has not been determined. However, the voice recordings from the cockpit and the plane's data recordings have been recovered. When Trump was asked in an interview why he thought diversity was the reason for the crash, he simply said, "Because I have common sense." He must be immediately removed from office. Meanwhile, Trump continues to push for his cabinet nominees while they do nothing to help themselves. At a hearing before Congress, RFK Jr. didn't have any idea what the differences were between Medicare Parts A, B, and C. That's Trump's nominee to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. The same question came up last week, so he knew it was going to come up during the hearing. One would think that during that week he would have taken a few moments to grab a book instead of grabbing his RFK Jr. And Kash Patel, Trump's nominee to run the FBI, into the ground that is, denied that he had ever met propagandist Stu Peters. Kash Patel has appeared on the Stu Peters Show podcast no less than 8 times. Also, the White House has confirmed that tomorrow Trump intends to move forward with tariffs on products coming from Canada, China, and Mexico. After promising to, quote, lower grocery prices on day one, unquote, and failing to do so, Trump is planning to enact tariffs that will not only raise the price of everyday items, but will also raise the price of countless other goods. He also continues to take credit for many of the Biden administration's accomplishments. He has signed almost 50 executive orders in his first 11 days, concerning everything from a federal spending freeze, removing federal funding from schools if they don't whitewash history books, banning transgenders from the military, a federal freeze on hiring, deporting immigrants whether they be legal or not, pardoning 1,600 terrorists from January 6th, and giving ICE agents access to schools and churches that they didn't have before. More than 2/3 of his executive orders line up with Project 2025, despite him trying to distance himself from it during the campaign. We all see through you, President Dipstick. I mentioned in an earlier episode that ABC News had set up Donald Trump to control the press, bringing us a step closer to a dictatorship when the media would only report what Trump once reported. Before the election, an editing room mistake made a portion of a 60 Minutes interview with Vice President Kamala Harris look disjointed. Even though the interview had nothing to do with Trump, he sued CBS News for it. Just like ABC News, CBS is now in discussions to settle the lawsuit rather than letting Trump humiliate himself in court. If CBS settles this ridiculous nonsense over an editing mistake that had nothing to do with Trump and didn't affect Trump in any way, there will be no turning back. That will be the moment that everyone in the press becomes an agent of Donald Trump. Trump has already spent the last decade trying to turn everyone against the press, calling himself the only reliable source for information. If that sounds familiar, it's because Hitler also did that as he was forming his dictatorship. This is what the Nazi Party, the Republican Party, has devolved into. And Trump's puppet master Elon Musk has already been displaying his Nazi salute. We are in dangerous territory, and it only gets worse if we lose any relatively objective voices in the press. On a side note, can you really claim to be the party of law and order if your leader is a convicted felon? A free press is essential to a democracy. Of course, it's also essential that the leader not be above the law. After the Supreme Court's unconstitutional ruling on presidential immunity, it may already be too late. We may have already been driven so far into this abyss that it would prove impossible to dig ourselves back out of it. And Trump and his corrupt Supreme Court are not the only problems. If Trump were to die in the next 4 years, even if he died of natural causes, there would be about 40% of the country who would believe he was killed in a conspiracy. They would find it impossible to believe that he died because he is more than 80 years old and suffering from dementia. They've even laid the groundwork to call anyone crazy who objects to their conspiracy theories. They have spent years lying about President Biden having dementia so that we would look crazy when we point out Trump's senility. They've spent years calling President Biden an illegitimate president so that we would look crazy when we point out that Trump is an illegitimate president. And the people that are still with Trump at this point, you will never convince them that Trump is anything less than God. So even if it's possible to fix the irreparable damage Trump has done to the government, what do we do about the brain-damaged people who refuse to see him for the threat that he is? Food for thought. Still ahead on Rebel Alliance, we'll take a look at this week in history. First, let's go looking for those people from whom you expect nothing and still come up disappointed. This week's most moronic morons. In third place, Nintendo. Nintendo filed a lawsuit against a Costa Rican grocery store named Super Mario. The claim was that Nintendo owned the name Super Mario. The problem is that the name itself is not copyrighted internationally. The lawsuit would have worked if they were suing over a video game named Super Mario. However, the Costa Rican National Registry rejected Nintendo's request, saying that the trademark lacked clarification in Costa Rica, and the grocery store owners were within their rights to call the store Super Mario. Nintendo literally lost a trademark battle over the name Super Mario. In second place, Congresswoman Lauren Boebert. Boebert came running out of a women's bathroom at the Capitol, screaming for security and claiming there was a guy in the women's room. Transgender people are prohibited from using single-sex restrooms, aligning with their gender identity at the Capitol, under a policy introduced by Nancy Mace as an attack on Congresswoman Sarah McBride. And why is it that Nancy Mace looks more like a trans woman than Sarah McBride does? Anywho, Lauren Boebert made a scene because she believed that Ms. McBride was in that women's room. The only problem was, the person in the women's restroom was not Congresswoman McBride. It was not a guy, and it was not a trans woman. It was just a lady trying to take a pee. Nice job, Boebert. But in first place, it's New York Mayor Eric Adams. Adams finally emerged from hiding after a week when his publicity team said he was dealing with health issues. Eric Adams was hiding because he's been shamed after having charges brought against him for bribery, fraud, and soliciting illegal foreign campaign donations. And don't be fooled by the D next to his name. Eric Adams is not a real Democrat. Where did he turn when he got in trouble? He turned to Donald Trump. Now Adams is brown-nosing Trump and has emerged again to say he is not resigning and you shouldn't count him out for re-election. Give it up, Eric. It's over. When the next election rolls around, you will be done being the New York mayor. But for turning to the criminal Trump when you yourself are revealed as a criminal, you have earned the dishonor of being this week's most moronic moron. And now, a look at this week in history. On January 27th, 1970, John Lennon wrote and recorded his hit song Instant Karma in one day. He wrote it quickly in the morning and had it in the studio in the afternoon. Phil Spector made an appearance at the studio and ended up producing the record, which would be released to the public 13 days later. It was John Lennon's third solo single to be released before the official breakup of the Beatles. On January 27, 1967, Apollo 1 astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee were killed in a fire during a routine launch simulation. They were the first Americans to die in a spacecraft, and the craft never left the ground. An investigation unveiled that a faulty electrical wire in the command module was the likely cause of the fire. The astronauts were doing a simulation of the Apollo 1 launch scheduled for the following month when the fire occurred. On January 28, 1986, the Challenger space shuttle exploded 73 seconds after liftoff and before it had even left the Earth's atmosphere. Among the 7-person crew was 37-year-old Krista McAuliffe, who was slated to be the first civilian in space. Millions watched on live television as the shuttle exploded. There were no survivors. On January 29, 1845, Edgar Allan Poe's poem The Raven was first published in the New York Evening Mirror. Like much of Poe's other work, the poem is dark and macabre. This reflected Poe's own difficult life and struggle with depression. The Raven is perhaps Poe's best-known work. On January 31st, 1933, The Lone Ranger premiered on Detroit radio station WXYZ. The Lone Ranger was created by station owner George Trendle and writer Fran Stryker, as they wanted to create a masked crusader with a strict code of conduct. They didn't worry about historical accuracy, but made sure their character always stuck to strict rules. He never smoked, swore, or drank alcohol. He always used grammatically correct language free of slang, and most importantly, he never shot to kill. The Lone Ranger became one of the most popular Western heroes of the 20th century. On February 1st, 2003, the Space Shuttle Columbia broke up on re-entry into the atmosphere over Texas, killing all 7 crew members on board. 80 seconds into the launch, a piece of foam insulation broke off of a propellant tank and hit the edge of the left wing. Scientists were unsure of the extent of the damage, and their concerns were widely ignored because NASA management thought little or nothing could be done to remedy the situation. However, an investigation in August of that same year revealed that it would have been possible to repair the wing or move the crew from the ship. After the incident, the Space Shuttle program was grounded until July of 2005. And that's this week in history on Rebel Alliance. For your friends who are not paying attention, make sure everyone is aware of Donald Trump's disgusting response to this week's plane crash. This is behavior that cannot be tolerated in a president of the United States. Remember to do your part by not patronizing businesses that support MAGA. Let's bankrupt them. Thank you so much, Rebels, for being part of the Alliance. And thank you for listening. Please subscribe to Rebel Alliance on Spotify and YouTube. If you know someone who should be listening to Rebel Alliance, please send it to them and ask them to subscribe as well. So that's Rebel Alliance for this week. 207 weeks until the scheduled end of the illegitimate presidency of lame duck sex offender president, convicted felon Donald Trump. Do what you can to resist, and in the meantime, keep breathing, drink water, take your vitamins and meds, and sleep when you can. Until next time, never back down.
The Department of Transportation is government agency charged with regulating civil aviation. Well, he runs it, 45,000 people, and he's run it right into the ground with his diversity.